Hello, everyone. The next topic we are going to deal with is persisting data. Um, what do we mean by persisting data? We have already seen persisting the UI state, but now we are talking about some other data, like say login information, preferences that a user has for the app, what color it should have, what font size, etc. And of course, going forward towards a more traditional database itself. Okay, so first we'll look at shared preferences today, and with a motivating example. So here are the recommended readings as usual from Android Developer Guide. Um, the app data and files itself talks about all these different ways of handling data. The second bullet point link here is about shared preferences. And next, which we'll discuss later, is a local database using Room. Okay. So first, a motivating example. Our dice game application as of now has this, let's say this is the landscape UI. It has 15 coins. Now you can rotate it and it will have 15 and 1, rotate back, and all of this works fine. But if for some reason you close the app through the recents view, or if the device reboots, you see that the number of coins goes back to 0. Now, it may be okay for the die to go back to 0, but and similar UI cases in many apps. But here, the number of coins, which is usually a game score, things like that, you would want to keep them and show them back when the user returns. Okay, so that is the motivating example for looking into shared preferences. So we'll see how to fix that. Okay, so before that, what are the persistent data options? Shared preferences is a primitive data. It's like a bundle, again, a key value pair. So you can store ints, strings, booleans, etc. on it. And the name is kind of misleading, but the idea was to use this for preferences like font size, color to be displayed, and so on. And you can still use it for that. In fact, it's recommended to use it for things like that. So that's where the name comes from. But you can also use it for other things like the number of coins in this particular game. Um, the uh, the underlying there is a file that the Android OS manages for you, and it's a private file for your app, so it's in the sandbox. Um, Although since it's a file outside of the activity or the app itself, in that sense, it is recommended not to store any sensitive data like passwords, etc., on shared preferences, not unencrypted at least. Okay, then you have internal and external storage, uh, which are which are places where you can write things to files on the device memory or external additional SD card, etc. We'll not talk in detail about these. I'll most likely use it or ask you to do a homework in which you explore these two. Then Android supports an SQLite database, which is a structured database, SQL structured, and it can be you can use private files for that. Okay. And finally, we'll have a room persistence library, um, uh, which is a local database, but so the room library has a lifecycle aware component. So that is the thing we'll talk about in the upcoming videos in some more details. Okay. And finally, of course, you must have heard of Firebase and other cloud databases which use no SQL structure. So shared preferences. Um, as I discussed on the previous slide, they are useful for storing small primitive data like a bundle. They are key value pairs. And the OS manages the file for you. You don't have to do anything except calling an API call. And it is private, so it's not accessible by other apps. The shared preferences class gives you appropriate methods, and we'll see how in a minute. So once again, for larger data, use other options like Room, Firebase, etc. Yes. Um, yes, so it's like the bundle that we have seen, but unlike the saved instance state, primarily in the sense the data persists on a file externally, so it persists across user sessions, like device rebooting even. Um, and it's useful for storing preferences, game scores, etc. Okay, so here is an example. What we'll do in our Dice Games apps is create a class Dice Game Preference. You can name it anything, of course, and it's a simple Java object. It does not extend anything in the Android OS as such. So we'll use the tag for logging and a key for storing and retrieving balance. But the third one here is interesting. So it's a unique string, which should be unique across the device, which will be the name of the file, basically. So using the a package name in the prefix or somewhere in the string is, of course, a good idea. Okay? And name of the actual name of the file doesn't really matter because we are only going to use it to create and retrieve through an API, but it should be unique. All right, so this is how you get the the preference file. Interesting thing is, since it is specific to the app, it needs the context. So you'll always need a context to create or retrieve or use the shared preference file. On that context, um, you can call get shared preferences and pass it the file name, and then use a mode. It's an int, which is used to basically create or access the file. Now it says mode private, so you would naturally think there must be mode public or something similar. Um, and it's recommended not to use any other parameter here. Always use mode private, but we need this in for backward compatibility. API 17 and before used to have other modes. Now it's recommended not to do it. So the shared preferences must be private to the app. Um, Again, that's kind of misleading given the name shared preferences. But to share data with other apps, there are other mechanisms which we'll get to a little later. So yeah, this is how you access it. Um, Now we'll see how to get data from it. So we are going to use it for balance. And once again, the getter for balance here would need a context to be passed. Okay, important thing to note is this method is static. We are never going to create an instance of dice game prefs. It's a static method, and we'll call it on the class itself because there is, it's a singleton instance of the shared preferences, so we can use it with static. Um, Getting the data out of it is very similar to how we have used bundle. So remaining things are not very different here. We simply call the get shared preferences and then call get int on that. Storing the data is somewhat more interesting. Okay, again, we need the context. Again, it is a static method. And now what we are doing here is, after getting the shared preferences, we are going to open a shared preference editor. Um, and that editor is the way of Android OS to handle everything that you need underneath. So all the file operations are done by the editor. Now you put the int on the editor, like we have done with bundle, and then you call editor.apply. So what happens here is this apply method saves the changes asynchronously without affecting your UI thread. So your UI thread is the one where the user is interacting. We'll talk a little more about threading a little later. Um, but the point here is you should not hold your UI thread for writing things to the file. Remember, this is a file, this is external, so it's going to take more time than writing to the bundle instance internally like we did earlier. So we want to push it off to push it off asynchronously without affecting the main UI. Okay, and then we have the log message. So Yeah, that is about creating or or the game preference shared preference class, which is going to handle the things. Now, how do we use it? One way could be to change the model view, the view model itself, but I would not recommend that. I would keep the view model as it is and only deal with the appropriate activity lifecycle methods when we want to store or retrieve the balance on the shared preference. Okay, so we don't change view model at all. We only make appropriate changes to the activity classes. And here is an example of the wallet activity class. Okay, so remember what we are doing. We are launching the show hand activity when the user clicks the show hand button, and we are passing the balance on the intent to the show hand activity. Now we no longer need that. Neither do we need to get back the balance when we return from the show hand activity. So all of that is gone. All these three lines are gone, and you simply have the intent, explicit intent for the show hand activity, and the start activity with intent, not the start activity for result anymore. So on activity result is also commented out. Okay, so all of that is gone. So now the question is, where do you handle shared preferences? And think about it for a few seconds. So the question is, where should you store things on the preference and when should you retrieve it? And the answer is in the life cycles, right? So while the user is dealing with the activity, your view model is capable of handling that. The question is, when um, when you go outside of the activity as a resumed method, that's when you want to store it on the shared preference. So if anything happens, like the device is rebooted or the app is closed from the retrieve from the recent menu, you should be able to get it back. Okay, so many of you might have guessed by now, we we store it in the on pause method. We store the balance on the dice game preference on the on pause method, and we retrieve the balance um, from the shared preference in the on resume method, right? Another important change is the update UI is now moved from on create to on resume, because remember, on resume will always be called after on create, in fact, after on start even. And that's when it's coming back to the user, and that's when we want to show it. Okay, so this is how we will change our code to handle shared preferences. Similar changes you can make on the show hand activity. Now we'll quickly take a look at the we'll demonstrate how this change looks. You can see I've commented out all that code, and we have I have the on resume and on pause here. Similarly on show an activity. Okay, yeah, by the way, on show an activity we'll also remove the um, return to wallet and the on back pressed methods. So we don't need them anymore. We don't want to pass the the balance on the intent anymore. Okay, so with that, let me just run it, and we should see the changes here. Okay, so that's installed. We get it here. Um, and okay, 5, let's get a few more. Okay, good, 15, 20, that was, I was lucky there. Okay, and rotation still works. Okay, 20 and 6, and 20 and 6, yeah, it's the view model that is handling it. No changes there. And now I go to show an activity. Okay, so we have 20 coins that we got. Let me bet 7 coins on the sum being odd. I roll it, and well, this time I was lucky. I got now 27 coins. I'm going to press the back button. We should see 27 back there. Okay. And we'll check all the log messages now. Let's see. So this is where um, we went from those 20 coins. Um, this is where I think I rotated the device. So on pause, wallet activity on pause, and then um, dice game preference, storing the balance 20. Then we saw on stop, on destroy, on create, on start, on resume, and retrieving the balance of 20 from there. Okay. And then this is where I click the show hand activity button. Again, it said storing the balance 20 on shared preference. Um, no, wait, this was rotating back. I'm sorry. So we rotated twice, right? Um, yeah, um, this is where I click the show hand button. So we want to on pause and show hand activity on resume, retrieve the balance of 20. Wallet activity went to stop, and the other things in show hand activity started. Then when I click the back button, we saw on back pressed, show hand activity on pause, it stored the balance, and in dice games, um, retrieve the balance because in wallet activity we are on resume. Okay, so that's how it's working. Um, just to demonstrate. Oh, sorry, when I lifted it, got rotated. To demonstrate, we can keep it even when remove it from the recents. Here it is, 27. Of course, this UI state is gone, but we don't really bother about that. Okay. All right. So that's how you can use shared preferences. We'll talk about more advanced UI, more advanced data things later. Thank you, guys.